Welcome, everyone, and good morning. Thank you so much for joining us today. I am Dia Bryant of the EdTrust-New York. We're part of the Raising New York Coalition, a diverse statewide coalition of parent, early childhood, education, civil rights, business, and health organizations dedicated to increasing the number of children who are on track for school readiness. We're excited to be with you all this morning to talk about the child tax credit expansions in the American Rescue Plan and how businesses, direct service organizations, and other groups can support families to ensure they receive their full credits. The American Rescue Plan is arguably the most consequential investment in our nation's youngest children in a generation. This investment is desperately needed. In New York alone, the COVID economic downturn has pushed about 325,000 additional New York children into poverty or near poverty. The burden of child poverty is not equally distributed, primarily due to continuing impacts of structural and systemic racism. Child poverty in our state approaches 30% for children of color, and Black children are more than twice as likely to live in poverty than their non-Hispanic white peers. In New York, the younger a child is, the more likely they are to live in poverty during the years that we know are most important, and about 90% of a child's brain is developing. Supporting our youngest children and their families is incredibly important for children's development and well-being. It is also incredibly important for our society as a whole. According to the United Hospital Fund, in New York alone, the increase in child poverty due to COVID will cost the state an estimated $1.7 billion in additional costs, beyond the $8.5 billion that was already lost in annual income. That is why the provisions included in the American Rescue Plan Act that we're going to talk about today are so absolutely critical to support infants and toddlers and their families, as well as our state's economic recovery from the COVID-19 crisis. This morning, we'll be talking more about why we believe supporting families to receive their full expanded tax credits is important to families, businesses, and direct service organizations. We'll also learn as many details as we currently have about what the changes to these credits are and what they mean for New York families. And we'll spend the final part of our time together today discussing strategies we can use to support families to receive their full credits. I'd now like to introduce you to two colleagues, Heather Brachetti, the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Business Council of New York, and Sheena Wright, the President and Chief Executive Officer of the United Way of New York City. They will talk to us more about this extraordinary opportunity. Heather and Sheena.
Hi, and good morning. As Dia outlined, the American Rescue Plan includes important changes to tax credits that support families with infants and toddlers. And we are particularly excited about the expansions to the child tax credit and the child independent care tax credit because we believe they have the potential to significantly reduce child poverty and provide critical support to New York families when they need it most. The expansion of the child tax credit is estimated to impact 1.5 million more children in New York than in previous years, and to lift more than 240,000 more children out of poverty. The child independent care tax credit expansion will help families offset the high cost of childcare, supporting our economic recovery by helping more parents to stay and return to the workforce. In a few minutes, we're going to hear details about the changes to these credits, but Sheena and I would first like to talk about why we believe strong support from employers and direct service providers can be critical to ensuring all eligible families receive access to these credits. In a Raising New York poll of business leaders last fall, more than half indicated that their employees' lack of childcare is a burden for their business and negatively impacts their ability to retain and hire employees. In particular, The Child and Dependent Care Tax Credit will help address the child care availability challenges and help put our state on path towards stronger economic recovery. Through human resources departments, businesses can ensure that employees are aware of the changes to these credits and are directed to resources that can help them to file the appropriate documentation so that they can fully enjoy and access these credits. So with that, I'll just pass it off to Sheena.
Thank you so much, Heather and Dia, and good morning. Just to underscore the critical import of this opportunity and legislation at this point in time. United Way of New York City works in service of the millions of low-income New Yorkers, predominantly of color, that are trying to make ends meet and achieve a level of economic mobility. So this tax credit is just monumental in the ability to do that. There are two things that are going to be really important at this juncture. One is around really spreading critical awareness about this effort. As we know, many people who do not owe taxes do not file taxes. So one of the things that we absolutely must do is a campaign where people can really understand and appreciate the benefit that is available, but also really tap into the network of trusted community-based organizations that can help people file this paperwork. May 17th is tax day, and we want to really mobilize the entire community to make sure that we can access these critical and needed funds. And even beyond May 17th, if you don't owe taxes, we want to ensure that people have the resources and supports to access these dollars. We cannot afford to leave anything on the table. The other critical thing that must happen is continued advocacy. This tax credit and this legislation is in place for 1 year. What we know is that if we really want to address child poverty for the long term, we have to make sure that these supports are in place for the future. So there absolutely also concurrently has to be a very significant policy and advocacy campaign as we move forward. It's so important what the work that we need employers to do, as well as in partnership with community-based organizations and other key stakeholders and communities. Those are two really critical, important things, and certainly where we sit at the intersection of the nonprofit, corporate, and government sector, we will certainly play our part and invite others to do the same. At this point, I would like to introduce Dee Dee Hill, the Director of Public Policy at the Schuyler Center for Analysis and Advocacy, and Pete Nabozny, Director of Policy at the Children's Agenda, to give a much more detailed overview of the tax credit changes in the Recovery Act.
Good morning. My name is Dee Dee, and I'm Policy Director at the Schuyler Center, as Sheena just said. And at the Schuyler Center, we engage in statewide advocacy to advance public policies that improve the well-being of low-income and marginalized New Yorkers, particularly kids and families, and particularly New Yorkers facing the obstacles presented by systemic, historic, and ongoing racism. We're also a proud member of the Raising New York Coalition. So I want to start. I'm going to give a little background about the American Rescue Plan Act, and then Pete's going to dive into some details. You know, as Dia, Heather, and Sheena already discussed, but really it can't be repeated enough. The American Rescue Plan Act is a game changer for families struggling with economic security, particularly in the wake of this challenging year. It is expected to significantly reduce child poverty in New York and across the nation in the coming year, mostly due to one remarkable component of the bill, and that's the expanded child tax credit, which Pete is going to dig into the details in a moment. But there are also some other, highlights that I just wanted to note. The American Rescue Plan also invests in a number of services that we know set children and families up to thrive. New York and all states have received significant funds for childcare. And in the case of New York, the state has received $1.8 billion. And this represents more than twice New York's annual child care subsidy budget, which is really extraordinary for a system that has long been underfunded. The American Rescue Plan Act also includes investments for home visiting supports, for child welfare, for housing. There's really extraordinary opportunity here. Next slide, please. But the need for the American Rescue Plan relief in New York comes not a moment too soon. In New York, prior to the pandemic, more than 712,000 children lived in poverty. And to put that into a national perspective, children in New York were more likely to live in poverty than in 32 other states. Due to structural and systemic, historic, and ongoing racism, child poverty among New York State children of color approached 30%, and Black children were more than twice as likely to live in poverty than their non-Hispanic white peers. And this was all prior to the pandemic. As Dia mentioned, since the pandemic hit New York, the numbers of children experiencing poverty in New York have only grown. By July of 2020, the COVID economic downturn had pushed 325,000 additional New York children into poverty or near poverty. So, as I said, the American Rescue Plan Act really funds come to New York not a moment too soon. So the American Rescue Plan Act's investment in children will not only put thousands of New York families back on track to thrive, it is also a smart investment for our communities, our state, our nation. For individuals experiencing poverty as a child can lead to a range of health issues, many of which follow the child into adulthood. Poverty can undermine academic achievement. It can undermine future adult earnings. In young children, the stress of poverty can actually impair brain development. And the economic costs of child poverty are also devastating at a community, at a state level, at a national level. It's estimated that lost productivity, higher health and crime costs amount to an annual loss to the United States of about $700 billion a year. So I think we can all agree child poverty harms us all, and we're overdue to eradicate it. The American Rescue Plan Act gives us an opportunity, a real jumpstart on tackling a devastating problem entirely within our power to end. And now I'm going to turn things over to Pete, who's going to talk about how we can really ensure that the American Rescue Plan Act benefits reach families.
Hi, everyone. It's good to be here today. Pete Navazny, the Director of Policy at the Children's Agenda. We're a similar organization to Skylar in terms of all the things that Dee Dee talked about and introduced our organization, but with a particular focus on our corner of the state here in Rochester, New York. And I'm going to kind of talk through the details at a still high level about the child tax credit and the child independent care tax credit. But with a caveat up front that there's still a lot that we don't know. This was only passed about a month ago. The IRS hasn't yet issued guidance on how a lot of this is going to be implemented over the course of this year, particularly with the child tax credit. So I just wanted to kind of get that out there up front that we're going to share as much information we have, but there are questions that still remain. And I think that's an important part of the conversation today. So the child tax credit, there is currently a child tax credit. Some families receive up to $2,000 per child currently. But most low-income families are excluded from that maximum credit. If you don't owe taxes right now, then you receive a maximum of $1,400 per child paid once a year. And really, most families in poverty, families in deep poverty especially, don't benefit from anywhere near that credit. It's really a credit that's targeted at middle income, even approaching upper income children and their families, obviously. The American Rescue Plan expansion, on the other hand, is really targeted at all families, who are below a certain income level, but with a particularly new inclusion of low-income families. So families with very low income, families, experiencing deep poverty, for the first time are eligible for this robust credit, which has been expanded from $2,000 to $3,000 for basically school-age children, and then to $3,600 for children birth to 5 years old. And obviously, Raising New York is a coalition focused on infants and toddlers, so we're particularly excited about the attention that's being given to those young children for all the reasons that Dia opened with and we've all been talking about over the course of this conversation. The other interesting thing and really important thing about the child tax credit expansion is that it's, at least the intent is, that it would be paid out monthly, starting in July, if we can kind of get everything together in time, which is really a change from sort of the traditional way that we administer tax credits and this kind of policy in the United States, where you receive your refund at tax time. Instead, for the child tax credit, this will be a payment that goes out, again, hopefully monthly, to families over the last 6 months of the year, with the balance of their credit being received when they do file their taxes next year. And that will really help smooth out income for families over the course of the year, allow for kind of better planning and understanding of what resources you'll have right now, as opposed to receiving something in a lump sum at the end of the year and needing that to either pay down debt or hopefully to be able to save money to smooth it out yourself over the course of the year. So we just wanted to kind of illustrate how big the impact of this credit is, particularly for low-income families. And the full credit, the full new child tax credit, the $3,000 per child, the $3,600 if the child is below the age of 6, that's being fully paid out to single filers up to $75,000 a year, and married couple filers up to $150,000 a year. So it's really targeted at working families that are struggling to make ends meet, and then it does phase out after that, extending up to several $100,000. So, but we wanted to look really at the impact on poverty here, because that's what this group is really focused on and is really concentrated on. So actually, if we could go back just for a second, so I just wanted to kind of show, just to talk through this real briefly. If you're making $20,000 a year, if you add up the child tax credit in the state and the federal EITC, your total income is almost $34,000 a year, which is really significant. And if you look at that, the EITC kind of comes and goes, but the child tax credit continues with families at each of those income levels and actually above that. And so it's a really important supplement to income. It still, it incentivizes work the same way that our current tax credits do. It doesn't have a tough phase out that may cause families to question whether taking a raise or adding hours, makes sense. But it does provide a base level of support to all of these families, and is really an important way to combat child poverty. You can just see that through the amounts that families will be receiving through the combination of credits, but the particularly new credit is this child tax credit at all these income levels. So we kind of have talked about this a bit already, but the impact of this child tax credit is extraordinary on families in New York State. Almost 250,000 children lifted from poverty to above that poverty threshold, which is around $25,000 a year for a family of 4, which is not a lot of money. And there's a lot of families that are below that line that are now above that line, and that represents about a third, a 33% reduction in child poverty. In addition, while not all these families are pulled out of poverty, 680,000 children estimated in the state will benefit from this expansion, which is truly extraordinary. 1.5 million children who did not previously qualify, their households didn't make enough money to previously qualify for the full credit, will now receive that full credit there. And nearly every family in New York State, almost 9 out of 10 receive that increased credit. So the other tax credit we wanted to highlight here today is the Child and Dependent Care Tax Credit, which doesn't have the same, headline impact on child poverty as the child tax credit, but it is extremely important for families to be able to afford the high cost of care, to be able to afford to work in a lot of ways, and to ensure that they're able to, place their child in a safe, nurturing, and enriching environment. So there's currently a child and dependent care tax credit that's, to be honest, pretty meager. It has a maximum credit of about $1,000 for one child, or $2,100 for more than one child. It's non-refundable, so a lot of low-income families don't benefit from that credit at the federal level in the way that they could. And most families, because if you're below a certain amount, you don't get the credit because you don't owe taxes. Most families just receive $600,000 or $600 or $1,200 a year, depending on the number of children. The credit that was passed, again, for 1 year only, and that's an important part for our advocacy, is a really dramatic expansion at this point. The maximum credit is $4,000 for one child and $8,000 for two or more children. And that's going to most families, making up to $125,000 a year will receive the full credit. And families making almost $500,000 a year will receive some kind of credit. So this is really targeted to families that are in the workforce that are struggling to pay for the high cost of care, and to give them some support during this recovery year that we're experiencing here. But it's also fully refundable. So low-income families that are also often struggling to pay for care and to make care arrangements for their children will get a pretty sizable return that is, in this case, will be paid out at tax time next year. And just to put this in context, the federal government has a standard that if you should pay about 7% of your income towards child care. And if you pay 7% or less, that's considered affordable child care, much in the way that 30% of your income towards housing costs is considered affordable housing for you. But in New York State, because we have some expensive care here, a family needs to make quite a bit of money to achieve that 7% affordability rule without any assistance. And the average annual cost of center-based care for two children is almost $25,000 a year. So if you look at those two children, an $8,000 credit, it doesn't address all the family needs. It doesn't pay for the entire cost of care. Families still have, quite a bit out of pocket that they'll have to pay, but they will get back a substantial portion of that, and that may allow them to, invest a bit more in care over the course of the year. Be able to deal with potential increases in costs that the child care provider is facing because of all the things that have happened this year during the pandemic and lower ratios and higher costs for providers. So this is a really important support for families that are always struggling to afford the cost of care, but particularly, I think, struggling this year. And we'll see how this, even just 1 year of this, helps stabilize some of the childcare sector and get families back to work and back to more traditional, childcare arrangements, which have been really upended over the course of the pandemic here. And finally, while it's not core to this presentation, we did just want to touch on, there was another key expansion of tax credits in the American Rescue Plan. It's something that the Raising New York Coalition is excited about, because we're also big proponents of expanding the earned income tax credit. The American Rescue Plan expands the earned income tax credit for childless low-income adults in New York State, expanding the maximum credit to up to $1,500 a year, which is really important, and raising the income limit of folks from $16,000 to $21,000 a year. And while that's not a direct benefit to families with young children, a lot of these workers who are in this range are young workers. They're people entering the workforce. They're often, women in their 20s who aren't making a ton of money, but are trying to kind of find their footing in their households. And this is an important way to help stabilize their households, and as they prepare to have children, ensure that they have perhaps a little more money, in their pockets to be able to afford some of the cost in that first period as they're pregnant, give birth, and are caring for their very young children. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to two of my colleagues, Amber Rangel Mooney, Director of Workforce Development at the Business Council of New York State, and Elizabeth Angeles, Senior Director of Advocate NYC at the United Way of New York City.
Thank you, Pete and Didi. As Pete mentioned, I'm Elizabeth Angeles. I lead our advocacy work at United Way of New York City. And Amber, I'll turn it over to you to introduce yourself as well.
Hi, thanks again. Amber Rangel Mooney, the Director of Workforce Development for the Business Council of New York State.
We are really excited that you have spent this morning and now as we enter the afternoon with us. Now that we're clear about the changes in the child tax credit and the child and dependent care tax credits, we'd like to add some additional detail about strategies that you all, employers and direct service organizations, can use to support families to receive these full credits. We've heard this morning how important it is to raise awareness about these credits, as there is only 1 year where these will be available based on what we know so far. And so we've shared a few ideas here in this slide, which we will go through. And we are also excited to hear from you about strategies that you're considering, as well as strategies that you might have used in the past and have found successful in other outreach or tax outreach that you've done in the community, so that we can figure out how as a community we can work together to raise awareness about these tax credits. One note before we start is we want to be clear, we are policy experts, and so we're not qualified to give you tax advice. But what we are hoping to do is to share and discuss how we will center on the strategies that organizations can use to spread awareness about these credits and connect families to the tax expert resources. We will not be able to answer tax specific questions.
So one thing we've put together a one-pager with the key information that Didi and Pete shared that will be available to each of you after this presentation. And we really want to use that as a tool across our communities. So we invite HR departments to distribute the information to their employees to make sure they're aware of the opportunities, as we already know how much of a challenge childcare is for working parents. So these tax benefits can help offset, as Pete mentioned, the high costs of care for families. And one thing that we're also hoping to do here today, which Elizabeth references, there are expert tax filing resources that are available at programs like the United Way's VITA program. But we want to encourage, additional partnerships with business and some of these community organizations who are providing direct services. That's something that we're hoping to have conversations with you all about.
Thanks, Amber. And so with that, we want to outline a couple of strategies that we have raised for you all here. So one strategy direct service organizations can consider is to have a sort of script or talking points for your community-facing staff that work directly in community. This might be something like asking a question if the folks that you're serving have filed their taxes, or just letting them know that tax credits are available this year, even if they haven't filed taxes in the past. And the other piece, as Amber mentioned, is we will be sharing a one-pager about the tax credits that will outline the details. And so we encourage you to share this in your regular communications with your clients or constituents. Amber, I'll turn it over to you to talk about employers before we turn to the next slide.
Sure. So we have the link. They dropped the link to the one-pager right in the chat, so you can access it right now. But we'll be sending out to our member organizations, businesses across the state, chambers of commerce across the state, so they have access to it, encouraging them to share with their employees. From an HR perspective, it's a really simple, it's a simple distribution through your HR department. And we really just encourage folks to do it. We spoke with our HR professionals and they thought it was absolutely something that organizations could easily take advantage of. So we're excited about that. And so that's essentially the short ask, the fast and easy. But I think there may also be additional opportunities for partnerships, which we can kind of all talk about together.
So we can turn to the next slide to begin to open it up for discussion. So before we turn into our open conversation, we have outlined a couple of questions here that might help us hear from all of you about either strategies and outreach that you've outreach strategies that you've used in the past. At United Way of New York City, for example, we have done a lot of outreach over the past year around the 2020 census efforts, which I'm sure many of you also worked on. And so we encourage you all to think about some of the strategies used there to raise awareness in community. And now we'd really like to open it up for discussion. As I mentioned, we have a series of questions on the slide. There are 2 ways that you can participate. The first and preferred option is for you to use the toolbar at the bottom of your Zoom screen and click the raise hand feature. Once you raise your hand and click that button, we will see and unmute you for either your question or your comment. If you have done some tax outreach or other outreach in the past and you want to share what has worked well with others, we encourage you to raise your hand and do that. You can also use the chat function to add some of your suggestions or experiences. We do ask that you do not use the Q&A function unless you have a question that you do not want to share with the full group. So please use the chat function. We'll look out for your comments there, or please go ahead and click the raise hand button and we will unmute you. Some of the questions that we would love to hear from you on are, have you done outreach about tax credits or benefits in the past? What has worked well? So we'll give you all a couple of minutes. Please, we would love to hear from you. Feel free to click the raise hand button. There we go. I think Stephanie has her hand raised.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Hi, Amber. New York, in the Council on Children and Families, a couple of years ago, actually it's not even a couple of years ago, it was prior to COVID, we had developed 2 infographics, one for the employer tax credit that the governor had passed in the 2020-2021 state fiscal year. And we also had completed another infographic related to the EITC. However, prior to right when COVID hit, we had received all of these infographics in print, but we have posted them on, I do believe they're posted on our New York State Council on Children and Families website. I did speak to the United Way VITA folks, and they felt that the infographics would be helpful during tax season. However, we were unable to distribute them. The only feedback that I received from a couple of the United Way organizations that do prepare taxes for low-income families and for small businesses indicated that they would have been helpful had we been able to actually distribute all the infographics. So I'll read the one pager, and I'm sure that if there's a way I could help at any point with doing another infographic with the much updated information, I would be willing to do that.
That would be great, Stephanie. And as you know, so the filing date, the deadline is 4 weeks from today. So
Yeah.
we have to extend it, and because this law just passed, tax preparers are also needed some time to adjust and get the new regulations from the IRS. And there is still some uncertainty, so I'm not surprised that you were unable to do that. But our one pager is mostly text heavy with kind of the overview.
Mm-hmm.
Love to see what you can do for an infographic. We'd greatly appreciate that. And you and I can talk offline about that. That sounds great.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. And I definitely, as you know, Amber, I look for your input. And I have a couple of TAs that I can reach out to that we don't have to deal with the whole rigmarole of trying to get a contractor. So my plan is to reach out to them today and also touch base with you, Amber, and see what we can do.
That'd be great. So that's a great partnership with the Office of Children and Family Services, which we greatly appreciate. Thank you, Stephanie.
You're welcome.
So, go ahead, Elizabeth.
No, I was going to just thank Stephanie for stepping up and sharing with us. We still invite you to go ahead and use the raise hand function if you'd like to share any opportunities that you see for your organization to either partner with additional nonprofits or share strategies. Amber, were you going to add?
Well, I was just going to say, given the United Way working with business, business nonprofits, government, you guys are right in the middle also, just thinking out loud, what are some ways that businesses who work with you can be supportive? Do a lot of the businesses that you work with, are they already engaged in the VITA program, and some of the, how closely are they working with some of the nonprofits that you support?
Yeah, at United Way of New York City, as I alluded to, our business sector partners have been really important in sharing the word, for example, around the 2020 census efforts, really through their own networks. At United Way of New York City, we don't run a VITA program, but if there are any other United Ways on the line, I invite other United Ways to also share opportunities where you all have worked on either tax credit outreach or directly with VITA sites. I think it's an important question, and I invite other United Ways who either might be on the line or others who have worked with United Ways across the state to share more. I see Fanny has, thank you, Fanny. Feel free to unmute. Fanny, did you want to share that out loud? I see Fanny is going to share this with the board.
Sure, not a problem. I don't know if anyone else is online from New York State SHRM, but I'm on the board and I'm more than willing to share that at the board meeting this coming Saturday.
That'd be great, Fanny. We really appreciate it. So, we put this together as quickly as we could after, after the law was passed, and understanding that the deadline is in a month. But we think that this is a great opportunity for just, businesses want to help their employees as much as they can, but obviously they're limited. So this is a way that we thought that they could just help by sharing information. So really appreciate that, Fanny. That would be tremendous.
Absolutely. And one other thought I have, and that is, especially the infographic that Stephanie and you would work on, and making it a little less text heavy. And I think it would be a great place to share with churches, because that's just a great space for BIPOC people to be sharing this information.
Yeah, absolutely. That they're very strong community organizations.
Mm-hmm.
So thank you. And, I don't know what type of timeline Stephanie was thinking about for that infographic, but we'll work with her, and hopefully we can get it sooner rather than later, because like we said, it's 4 weeks from today. But the other benefit is if you don't owe taxes, you can file late and still access these benefits. So we're not necessarily missing a deadline if people don't file by May 17th if they don't owe. And we know a lot of low-income people don't owe taxes. So that's another thing that we want to make sure we can keep telling people, that they can still file their taxes and get access to these credits.
Thank you, Amber. I think that's a really important point, that while, May 17th is an important marker, we still have time to spread the word and raise awareness about this. I should also add that we at United Way of New York City do have a network of benefits access providers that we work with who do tax prep. So that is an area where we can raise awareness about this as well. Thank you, Amber, for highlighting that we do have more time. So this is certainly an important conversation to continue having even beyond the May 17th date.
I was just going to say, I still encourage people, if you have any thoughts regarding these questions, if you've had any successes or opportunities in the past, or anything else that you see as opportunities, please feel free to raise your hand or drop it in the chat. Welcome you to join. And this is, a time that we just hope to open it up to you and join us in this conversation. So, so please don't be shy. Your camera won't be turned on. It's just audio.
give folks another minute to see if folks want to share or reflect on any of the questions. But we really want to thank Fanny and Stephanie for really sharing ideas and really engaging with us. And we hope others will reach out to us as well to engage on this further.
Yeah, I'm very excited. I think those are two really great ways that we'll be able to get this information across the state. So very excited about both of those. So thank you, Fanny and Stephanie. That's a tremendous opportunity. Were there any other folks from the United Ways across the state who wanted to maybe share about some of the work that they've done with businesses and their tax prep programs? Unfortunately, the chat's not like an iPhone, so I can't see if anyone's typing.
I don't see anything coming in the chat or other hands raised. So perhaps with that, we can turn it over to Dia Bryant to close us out.
Thank you. I mean, it is such a pleasure to work alongside these knowledgeable and very fierce advocates. And we appreciate all of you being with us today. The next 4 weeks before May 17th will be critical, and it's a great opportunity for us to support New York families and ensure that everyone can get the benefit of these very important and often life-changing tax credits. The work is definitely an important step in the long road to New York's economic recovery from the pandemic. And we think that the tax credits can actually support millions of New York's smallest children and their families. Over the next 4 weeks, Raising New York will continue to be a resource to you as we all work with families and continue to support. We hope that you will share the infographics and things that your orgs have as well that we can all share and take part in. And this work actually won't stop on May 17th. The tax credits only last for the next year, so we have to continue to work together to highlight their impact and to make the case to the US Congress for making these tax credits permanent. If you'd like to stay in touch regarding our advocacy to make these tax credits permanently, please visit raisingnewyork.org to sign up for our newsletter. Again, your work is critical. Thank you for being here, and I hope that you all have a fantastic week. Be well.